The coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered against the kitchen floor when my husband David announced he was leaving me for his 26-year-old dental hygienist. But that wasn't the part that made my world stop spinning. It was what he said next, standing there in his perfectly pressed khakis like he was discussing weekend plans. "Don't worry, Margaret. I'll be generous with the divorce settlement. You can keep the house, and I'll make sure you get 30% of what Sunshine Dental is worth." I stared at him across our breakfast table, the same table where we'd shared 35 years of morning conversations, and realized he had no idea what he'd just said. You see, David had made one tiny miscalculation in his grand exit strategy. He assumed he owned our dental practice. He didn't. I did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved for you. My name is Margaret Walsh, though everyone in Cedar Falls, Iowa calls me Maggie. I'm 57 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the devoted wife of Dr. David Walsh, the quiet woman who managed his dental practice behind the scenes while he charmed patients, and played golf with other successful men in our small town. I was the one who never complained when he came home late from emergency procedures, or when he forgot our anniversary for the 3rd year running. I was, I believed, lucky to be married to the most respected dentist in 3 counties. That Tuesday, morning started like any other. I was making David's coffee exactly the way he liked it, strong with 1 sugar, while scanning through the practice's appointment schedule on my tablet. We'd built Sunshine Dental from nothing back in 1989, starting with a single chair in a converted Victorian house on Maple Street. Now, 35 years later, we had 6 chairs, 4 hygienists, 2 associate dentists, and a patient list that stretched across half the state. People drove hours to see us because we'd built something special, something that combined cutting-edge dental care with the warmth of small-town service. David walked into our kitchen that morning looking different somehow. His silver hair was styled more carefully than usual, and he was wearing cologne. In all our years together, David had never worn cologne to work. He sat down across from me at our antique farmhouse table, the one we'd bought at an estate sale during our 2nd year of marriage when we were still scraping together every penny to keep the practice afloat. "Maggie," he said, not meeting my eyes, "we need to talk." Those 4 words landed in my stomach like ice water. In 35 years of marriage, David had never started a conversation with, "We need to talk," unless something was seriously wrong. The last time he'd used those words, his father had been diagnosed with cancer. I set down my coffee cup and turned to face him fully. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" David shifted in his chair, still avoiding eye contact. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what I want from life, about what makes me happy." My chest tightened. "Okay. The thing is, Maggie, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time." I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. "What do you mean?" "I mean us. This marriage. It's not working anymore." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Not working anymore. After 35 years, after building a life and a business together, after weathering his father's death and my mother's stroke and countless other storms, he was telling me our marriage wasn't working anymore. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "What's changed?" That's when David finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not sadness or regret, but relief. Like he'd been carrying a burden and was finally setting it down. "I've met someone," he said. The kitchen fell completely silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock my parents had given us as a wedding gift. Met someone. Such simple words for something that was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. Who? The word came out as barely a whisper. "Her name is Ashley. She's one of our hygienists." Ashley. I knew Ashley. She was The young woman we'd hired 8 months ago, fresh out of hygienist school with bright blonde hair and an eager smile. She was the one who always stayed late to help with inventory. The one who volunteered for weekend emergency calls. The one who'd been working so many extra hours lately that I'd actually felt grateful for her dedication. "How long?" I asked. David had the grace to look uncomfortable. "A few months." A few months, while I'd been managing his schedule, handling his billing, covering for him when he was late or distracted. He'd been carrying on an affair with a woman young enough to be our daughter. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I really am. But I can't keep pretending anymore. I want a divorce." The coffee cup slipped from my hands then, shattering against the hardwood floor in an explosion of ceramic and coffee. But David kept talking, his voice steady and businesslike, as if he was explaining a dental procedure to a patient. "I know this is hard, but I want to be fair about everything. You can keep the house, of course. And I'll make sure you get a good settlement from the practice. 30% seems reasonable. That should be enough for you to live comfortably." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. 30% of the practice. A settlement. Like I was some employee he was laying off, not the woman who'd built that business alongside him from the very beginning. 30%? I repeated. "Well, yes. I mean, I know you've helped over the years with the administrative stuff, but let's be realistic. I'm the dentist. I'm the one patients come to see. Without me, there is no Sunshine Dental." Administrative stuff. 35 years of my life, reduced to administrative stuff. I bent down to pick up the larger pieces of the broken cup, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. David made no move to help me clean up the mess. He just sat there, checking his phone, probably texting Ashley about how the conversation was going. "There's something else," he said without looking up from his screen. "I think it would be best if you didn't come into the office for a while, just until we get everything sorted out legally. Ashley and I can handle things." Ashley and I. Like, they were already a team. Like I was already erased from the equation. I straightened up, still holding pieces of broken ceramic. "You want me to stay away from the practice?" "Just temporarily. You know how people talk in a small town. It'll be easier for everyone if we keep things professional during the transition." Professional. The transition. He had an answer for everything. This man I'd been married to for 35 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd planned this whole conversation like he planned his dental procedures, every step mapped out in advance. I walked to the trash can and dropped the ceramic pieces inside, each shard making a sharp sound as it hit the bottom. When I turned back to face David, he was standing up, straightening his tie. "I'll be staying at the Marriott for now," he said. "My lawyer will be in touch about the paperwork." His lawyer. He already had a lawyer. David walked toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Maggie, you're a good woman. You deserve to be happy too. Maybe this will be a fresh start for both of us." And then he was gone, leaving me, standing in our kitchen surrounded by the wreckage of my life, trying to understand how 35 years could be dismissed so casually. I stood there for a long time after David left, staring at the coffee stain on the floor where my cup had shattered. The house felt different somehow, like the walls had shifted when I wasn't looking. Everything looked the same, but nothing was the same. The family photos on the refrigerator, the dental conference certificates hanging in David's study, the carefully tended garden visible through the kitchen window where I'd spent countless Saturday mornings planning our future together. All of it felt like props in someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text message. For one crazy moment, I thought it might be David, saying he'd made a terrible mistake and was coming home. Instead, it was from my sister Carol in Minneapolis. "Lunch today at noon. Can't wait to catch up." Carol. I'd completely forgotten we'd planned to meet when she was driving through town on her way to visit our aunt in Des Moines. I looked at the clock. 10:30. In 90 minutes, I was supposed to sit across from my sister and pretend everything was normal while my entire world was falling apart. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, David's cologne still lingering in the air. His dresser drawers were pulled out slightly, and I could see gaps where his clothes used to be. He'd been packing. While I was sleeping in the bed next to him, planning our upcoming vacation to Branson, he'd been secretly moving his belongings out of our home. I sat on the edge of our bed and tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt numb, like I was watching everything happen to someone else from a great distance. David was leaving me for Ashley, the hygienist with the perfect smile and the boundless energy. David thought he owned our dental practice and was generously offering me 30%. David had already hired a lawyer and found a place to stay. David had thought of everything except one crucial detail. I walked to our home office, the small room where I'd handled all the practice's paperwork for 35 years. The filing cabinets that lined one wall contained every document related to Sunshine Dental, from the original incorporation papers to last month's tax returns. I pulled out the bottom drawer of the largest cabinet and reached toward the back, where I kept the folder labeled Business Formation. Inside were the documents my sister Carol had helped me prepare back in 1989 when we were setting up the practice. Carol was a business attorney then, fresh out of law school and working for a firm in Minneapolis. She'd insisted on coming down to Cedar Falls to help us get everything set up properly. "You need to protect yourself, Maggie," she'd said at the time. "I know David's a good guy, but business partnerships can get complicated. Make sure your name is on everything that matters." I'd followed her advice, even though David had seemed mildly annoyed by all the legal formalities. "It's just paperwork," he'd said. "We're married. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." But Carol had been insistent. "Marriage is one thing. Business ownership is another. Trust me on this." I pulled out the incorporation documents and spread them on the desk. There it was, in black and white, exactly as Carol had set it up 35 years ago. Sunshine Dental, LLC. Owner, Margaret. Walsh. David Walsh was listed as the primary employee and practice manager, with profit-sharing benefits and decision-making authority for clinical matters. But I owned the practice. I had always owned the practice. David had forgotten this detail, probably because he'd never paid attention to the paperwork side of our business. He saw patients, performed procedures, attended conferences, and collected praise from grateful patients. I handled everything else: the billing, the insurance claims, the staff scheduling, the vendor negotiations, the tax preparations, the loan applications, the lease agreements. I was the one who'd personally guaranteed every business loan. I was the one whose credit had been on the line when we expanded. I was the one who'd built the relationships with suppliers and insurance companies. David was the face of Sunshine Dental, but I was its backbone. I picked up my phone and called Carol. "Maggie, perfect timing. I was just leaving Minneapolis. I should be there by noon for lunch." "Carol," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to tell you something. David and I are getting divorced." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "What happened?" "He's been having an affair with one of our employees. He told me this morning. He wants to keep the practice and give me 30% as a settlement." "Oh, honey." Carol's voice was soft with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "I don't know yet. But, Carol, I need to ask you something about the business documents you helped us set up." "What about them?" I looked down at the incorporation papers spread across my desk. "David thinks he owns Sunshine Dental, but according to these documents, I'm the sole owner, right?" There was a pause, then a sound that might have been Carol trying not to laugh. "Oh, Maggie. Yes, you're the sole owner. I set it up that way specifically to protect you. David is an employee with profit-sharing benefits. He doesn't know. Apparently not. I felt something shift inside my chest, like a door opening that I didn't even know was there. Carol, I think David is about to learn something very interesting about the business he thinks he's taking from me. Do you want me to represent you in the divorce? I looked around the office where I'd spent so many hours building something I was proud of, where I'd managed every aspect of a business that David was casually dismissing as his own creation. Yes, I said. I think I do. After I hung up with Carol, I sat in the office for a while, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The early years when David and I had worked 18-hour days to get the practice established. The sleepless nights when I'd worried about making payroll or paying the rent. The careful budgeting and planning that had allowed us to expand from 1 chair to 6. The relationships I'd built with patients who trusted us with their families. Dental care. David saw himself as the star of Sunshine Dental, but the truth was more complicated. Yes, he was a skilled dentist. Yes, patients liked him. But he'd never had to worry about the business side because I'd handled all of it. When he wanted new equipment, I found the financing. When we needed to hire staff, I managed the process. When insurance companies tried to deny claims, I fought them. When patients had billing questions or scheduling conflicts, they called me. I was the one who'd turned David's dental skills into a successful business. And now he thought he could just walk away with everything I'd built, leaving me with a pat on the head and 30%. David had made one critical error in his calculation. He'd confused being the public face of something with actually owning it, and he was about to discover that those were two very different things. I glanced at the clock. 11:15. In 45 minutes, I was supposed to meet Carol for lunch and figure out how to rebuild my life. But first, I had a phone call to make. I picked up my phone and dialed the office number for Sunshine Dental. Ashley answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Good morning, Sunshine Dental. This is Ashley. How can I help you? Hi, Ashley. This is Mrs. Walsh. Is Dr. Walsh available? There was a brief pause, and I could almost hear her processing the awkwardness of the situation. Oh, hi, Mrs. Walsh. He's with a patient right now. Can I take a message? Actually, I was calling to speak with you. Another pause, longer this time. With me? Yes. I wanted to let you know that I'll be coming in this afternoon to discuss some changes to the practice operations. Could you ask Dr. Walsh to make sure he's available around 2 o'clock? Sure. I'll let him know. Thank you, Ashley. Oh, and one more thing. Could you pull the employee handbook from the filing cabinet? I'll need to review the section about workplace relationships and professional conduct. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Ashley, are you still there? Yes, ma'am. I'll find that for you. Wonderful. I'll see you this afternoon. I hung up and smiled for the first time since David had walked out of our kitchen. Ashley was about to learn something very important about the difference between sleeping with the boss and sleeping with the boss's boss. And David was about to discover that 35 years of marriage had taught me a thing or two about planning ahead. The drive to Romano's Bistro felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. Carol was already waiting at our usual corner table when I arrived, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the 3-hour drive from Minneapolis. She looked up from her menu with the warm smile that had gotten us both through countless childhood crises, but her expression shifted the moment she saw my face. "Oh, honey," she said, standing to pull me into a fierce hug. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." I sank into the chair across from her, grateful for the familiar comfort of my sister's presence. Carol had always been my anchor. 5 years older and infinitely wiser about navigating the complexities of life. When I'd married David straight out of college, she'd been the one to insist on prenups and proper business documentation. When I'd wanted to trust everything to love and good intentions, she'd been the voice of practical wisdom. "Tell me everything," she said, signaling the waitress for coffee. I found myself recounting the morning's events in mechanical detail, watching Carol's face grow darker with each revelation. When I got to the part about David's generous offer of 30%, her jaw tightened visibly. "That arrogant piece of work," she muttered, "after everything you've done for that practice." "Carol, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When we set up the business structure all those years ago, you made me the sole owner. Was that because you didn't trust David, or was it just standard legal practice?" Carol set down her coffee cup and looked at me with the serious expression she reserved for her most important clients. "Both. But mostly because I didn't trust him." The bluntness of her answer hit me like cold water. "What do you mean?" "Maggie, I've watched David for 35 years. He's charming, he's successful, and he genuinely cares about his patients. But he's also someone who takes credit for other people's work without even realizing he's doing it." "Do you remember your wedding reception?" I nodded, confused by the change of subject. "David spent the entire evening telling people about his plans for building a dental empire. Your plans, actually. The ones you'd outlined in that business proposal you'd been working on for months. But he talked about them like they were his ideas, like you were just along for the ride." The memory came flooding back. I'd spent weeks researching market opportunities in small Iowa towns, developing financial projections, and creating a comprehensive business plan. David had glanced at it once and said it looked good, but at our reception, he'd presented every detail as his own vision. "I knew then that you needed protection," Carol continued. "Not because David was malicious, but because he genuinely believed his own version of reality. In his mind, he was the brilliant dentist with the big dreams, and you were the supportive wife who helped him achieve them. He never saw that you were the architect of his success." I stared at my untouched salad, processing this revelation. So the business structure wasn't just about protecting my interests, it was about protecting the truth. Exactly. And now that truth is about to matter more than ever. Carol reached into her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. "I've been thinking about this during the drive down here. David's affair isn't just a personal betrayal. Having a romantic relationship with an employee creates serious liability issues for the practice. Sexual harassment lawsuits, hostile work environment claims, ethics violations with the state dental board. As the business owner, you could face significant legal and financial consequences." But I didn't know about the affair. "That doesn't matter. You're still liable as the owner, which means you have grounds to terminate both David and Ashley immediately with cause." The implications of what she was saying began to sink in. "You mean I could fire them both?" "More than that. David's employment contract includes a morality clause and a non-compete agreement. By having an affair with a subordinate employee, he's violated both. You could terminate him without severance, enforce the non-compete to prevent him from practicing within a 50-mile radius, and sue him for damages to the practice's reputation." I felt something shift inside my chest, like a weight I'd been carrying for years was finally lifting. "David has no idea what he's walked into, does he?" Carol smiled grimly. "None whatsoever. He thinks he's leaving you with scraps from his empire. He doesn't realize he's just handed you every weapon you need to protect what you built." We spent the next hour going through the legal implications of David's choices. Carol explained how employee terminations worked, what documentation I'd need, and how to protect the practice's assets during the divorce proceedings. By the time we finished lunch, I had a clear action plan and something I hadn't felt in years: complete confidence in my own power. "There's one more thing," Carol said as we prepared to leave. "You're going to need to be prepared for David's reaction when he realizes what's happening. Men like him don't handle loss of control well, especially when they discover they never had the control they thought they did." "What do you think he'll do?" "He'll get angry. He'll try to intimidate you. He'll probably threaten legal action. But Maggie, You have to remember something crucial. He has no legal standing whatsoever. You own everything. He's just an employee who's been cheating with another employee. Whatever threats he makes, they're empty. I hugged my sister goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, feeling more clear-headed than I had in months. The numbness from the morning was gone, replaced by a crystalline sense of purpose. David thought he was discarding me like an outdated piece of equipment. Instead, he'd just freed me to finally take control of my own life. The drive to Sunshine Dental took 12 minutes, the same route I'd driven thousands of times over the past 35 years. But today felt different. Today I wasn't driving to work at David's practice. I was driving to reclaim my own business. The parking lot was nearly full when I arrived, a sign of the thriving practice we'd built together. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the building that housed everything I'd worked for. The brick facade we'd chosen together, the landscaping I'd planned and maintained, the sign that read, Sunshine Dental, David Walsh, DDS, in elegant gold lettering. That sign was going to need updating. I walked through the front door and was greeted by Janet, our longtime receptionist, who looked surprised to see me. Mrs. Walsh, I wasn't expecting you today. Dr. Walsh said you weren't feeling well. I'm feeling much better now, thank you. Is Dr. Walsh available? Janet glanced toward the back offices, her expression uncomfortable. He's in his office, with Ashley. They said they were discussing the new patient intake procedures. Perfect. Could you ask them both to come to the conference room? I need to speak with them about some important policy changes. Of course. Should I tell them what it's regarding? I smiled at Janet, this woman who'd been answering our phones and greeting our patients for over a decade. Tell them it's about workplace conduct and professional standards. Janet's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded and headed toward the back offices. I walked to the conference room, a space we'd added during our major expansion 5 years ago. The walls were lined with certificates and awards, photos from dental conferences, and framed thank you letters from grateful patients. Everything in this room represented the success David thought he was entitled to claim. 5 minutes later, David entered the conference room with Ashley trailing behind him. His confident demeanor from the morning had been replaced by wariness, and Ashley looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Maggie, David said carefully, I thought we agreed you'd stay home today. Actually, David, you told me to stay home. I never agreed to anything. I gestured to the chairs across from me. Please, both of you, have a seat. They sat down. Reluctantly, David maintaining eye contact while Ashley stared at her hands. The power dynamic in the room was already shifting, and all three of us could feel it. I've called this meeting to address some serious concerns about workplace conduct and professional standards here at Sunshine Dental, I began, keeping my voice steady and businesslike. It's come to my attention that there may be inappropriate relationships developing between staff members, which creates significant liability issues for the practice. David's face flushed red. Maggie, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. On the contrary, this is exactly the time and place. As the owner of this practice, I have a responsibility to ensure that all employees are following appropriate professional standards. Owner? David's voice rose slightly. Maggie, I think you're confused about the business structure here. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the incorporation documents Carol had helped me organize 35 years ago. I placed them on the conference table between us, open to the page that clearly listed me as the sole owner of Sunshine Dental, LLC. There's no confusion, David. I am the sole owner of this practice. You are an employee, and according to your employment contract, which you signed when we formalized the business structure in 1995, romantic relationships between employees are strictly prohibited, especially between supervisors and their subordinates. The color drained from David's face as he stared at the documents. Ashley made a small sound that might have been a whimper. This is ridiculous, David said. but his voice lacked conviction. We built this practice together. You can't just pretend that our marriage doesn't matter. Our marriage and the business ownership are two separate issues, David. The marriage is ending, as you made very clear this morning. But the business ownership was established long before this morning, and it's not subject to your personal decisions. I turned to Ashley, who was still staring at her hands. Ashley, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. As an employee of this practice, you've entered into a romantic relationship with your direct supervisor, which violates our workplace conduct policies. This creates legal liability for both you and the practice. Ashley finally looked up, her eyes wide with panic. Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I understand that emotions can be complicated, I said, maintaining a professional tone. But actions have consequences, especially in a professional healthcare environment. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Enough. Maggie, you're being completely unreasonable. You can't just waltz in here and start threatening people over personal relationships. I remained seated, looking up at him calmly. I'm not threatening anyone, David. I'm explaining the legal realities of workplace conduct violations. As the business owner, I have both the right and the responsibility to address these issues. Business owner, David repeated, his voice heavy with sarcasm. You keep saying that like it means something. But we both know that without me, there is no Sunshine Dental. I'm the one patients come to see. I'm the one with the dental degree and the reputation. You're just the administrator. The casual dismissiveness in his voice, the same tone he'd used that morning when he'd reduced 35 years of my work to administrative stuff, triggered something deep in my chest. I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze directly. You're right about one thing, David. Patients do come here to see you. But they come to a practice that I built, in a building I lease, using equipment I purchased, with systems I designed. You perform dental procedures. Everything else that makes this a successful business, that's mine. I walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of the conference room and pulled out a thick folder. Insurance contracts, all signed by me. Vendor agreements, all in my name. Business loans, personally guaranteed by me. Staff contracts, all executed under my authority as business owner. Bank accounts, all under my control. The lease for this building, in my name. I set the folder on the table with a decisive thud. You are an excellent dentist, David, but you are an employee of my business, and you have just violated the terms of your employment in a way that exposes both of us to significant legal liability. Ashley had gone completely pale. What does this mean for me? I looked at her, this young woman who'd gotten caught up in David's midlife crisis without understanding the implications. It means, Ashley, that your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Janet will prepare your final paycheck, including any unused vacation time. You can't fire her, David said, his voice rising. She's done nothing wrong. She's violated workplace conduct policies by engaging in a romantic relationship with her supervisor. That's grounds for immediate termination. I turned back to Ashley. You'll need to gather your personal belongings and return any practice property, including your keycard and uniform. Ashley stood on shaky legs. Can I at least finish out the week? I need time to find another job. I'm sorry, but given the circumstances, I can't allow you to continue working here. However, I'll provide a neutral reference confirming your dates of employment and job performance prior to this incident. Ashley nodded miserably and headed for the door. David started to follow her, but I stopped him. David, we're not finished. He turned back to me, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. What else could you possibly want to discuss? Your employment status. You've also violated the workplace conduct policy, and as the senior employee involved, your violation is even more serious. My employment status? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maggie, you're losing your mind. I am this practice. Fire me if you want, but you'll destroy everything we've built. I sat back down and folded my hands on the table. That's an interesting theory, David. Shall we test it? The silence in the conference room stretched between us like a live wire. David stood frozen by the door, his hand still on the handle, as the implications of my words began to sink in. For 35 years, he'd operated under the assumption that he was indispensable, that Sunshine Dental existed because of him rather than around him. Now, faced with the reality of his actual position, he looked like a man watching his entire world shift beneath his feet. "You can't be serious," he said finally, releasing the door handle and turning back to face me. "Maggie, think about what you're saying. If you fire me, you'll lose half the patients within a month. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez, they respect me. They'll follow me wherever I go." Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez were our two associate dentists, both talented professionals who'd joined the practice within the last 5 years. David was probably right that they respected him, but he was making the same mistake he'd been making all morning, assuming respect was the same as loyalty, and assuming loyalty was transferable. "That's certainly possible," I agreed. "Although, I suspect you're overestimating your influence. But let's say you're right. Let's say half our patients decide to follow you to wherever you end up practicing. Can you tell me where that might be?" David's confident expression faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where exactly are you planning to practice dentistry, David? Because according to the non-compete clause in your employment contract, you're prohibited from practicing within a 50-mile radius of Cedar Falls for a period of 2 years if your employment is terminated for cause." I reached back into the folder and pulled out David's original employment contract, the one he'd signed 15 years ago when we'd restructured the business after our major expansion. I flipped to page 4 and pointed to the relevant clause. "Workplace conduct violations, including inappropriate relationships with subordinate employees, constitute termination for cause. Which means if I fire you today, you can't open a practice in Cedar Falls, Waterloo, Iowa City, or anywhere else within 50 miles of here." David's face went white as he read the contract language. "That's impossible. I would never have signed." Something like that. "But you did sign it, right there at the bottom of page 6. Your signature, dated March 15th, 2009, witnessed by Carol and notarized by Mary Henderson at First National Bank." He stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. "I don't remember this." "That's because you never read it, David. You trusted me to handle all the business details while you focused on dentistry, which was fine until you decided that trust was a one-way street." I pulled out another document, this one more recent. "There's also the matter of your continuing education requirements. As the practice owner, I'm responsible for ensuring all employees maintain their professional certifications. You're currently 6 months behind on your continuing education credits, which puts both your license and our practice insurance at risk." David's mouth opened and closed without sound. In his rush to plan his new life with Ashley, he'd apparently forgotten about the mundane professional requirements that kept him legally able to practice dentistry. "Furthermore," I continued, "your behavior with Ashley has created a potential sexual harassment liability for the practice. Even though she claims the relationship was consensual, the power dynamic between a senior doctor and a hygienist makes that consent legally questionable. Our malpractice insurance doesn't cover sexual harassment claims, which means any lawsuit would come directly out of practice assets." I could see David's mind racing, trying to find an angle, a way to regain control of the situation. But Carol had been thorough when she'd helped me set up these protections, and David had spent 35 years ignoring the details that were now trapping him. "This is insane," he said, sinking back into his chair. "You're talking about destroying everything we built over one mistake." "One mistake?" I raised an eyebrow. "David, you didn't accidentally fall into bed with Ashley. You made a series of deliberate choices over several months. You chose to pursue a relationship with your employee. You chose to carry on an affair behind my back. You chose to assume you could walk away with my business. And this morning, you chose to tell me that 35 years of building this practice together was just administrative stuff. David buried his face in his hands. What do you want from me, Maggie? I want you to understand the reality of your situation. You are not the owner of this practice. You are not in control of what happens next. You are an employee who has violated the terms of his employment and created significant legal liability for my business. So what happens now? I leaned back in my chair, studying this man I'd been married to for 35 years. Despite everything, despite the affair and the arrogance and the casual dismissal of my contributions, I felt more sad than angry. David wasn't evil. He was just a man who'd spent so long believing his own mythology that he'd lost sight of reality. That depends on you, I said finally. You have two options. Option 1. I terminate your employment for cause, effective immediately. You lose your severance, the non-compete clause kicks in, and you spend the next 2 years figuring out how to practice dentistry somewhere that's not within 50 miles of here. Given that most of your professional relationships are in this area, that's going to be challenging. David looked up at me, his face pale. What's option 2? Option 2, you resign voluntarily with a transition period to transfer your patient relationships to Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez. You get a reasonable severance package, and I agree to waive the non-compete clause in exchange for your cooperation in ensuring a smooth transition. And the divorce. The divorce proceeds as planned, but with a clear understanding of what assets actually belong to whom. The house is jointly owned, so we'll divide that according to Iowa law. Your retirement accounts, your personal assets, your half of our joint savings, all of that will be divided fairly. But the practice stays with me. David sat quietly for several minutes, processing the options I'd laid out. I could almost see him running calculations in his head, trying to figure out which path offered him the best chance of salvaging his plans. If I choose option 2, he said slowly, how long would the transition period be? 3 months. Long enough to ensure patient continuity and to train the other doctors on your more complex cases. And you'd really waive the non-compete? I'd be willing to modify it. Instead of a 50-mile radius, you'd be prohibited from practicing within Cedar Falls city limits for 1 year. That would still allow you to set up a practice in Waterloo or Iowa City. David nodded slowly. What about Ashley? What about her? Could you reconsider firing her? She's a good hygienist, and this situation isn't entirely her fault. I stared at him in disbelief. David, she's 26 years old. She's been having an affair with her married boss, and you think I should keep her employed so you two can continue your relationship under my roof? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Ashley's employment is terminated, effective today. That's not negotiable. David slumped in his chair. How long do I have to decide? Until 5 o'clock today. I need to know which option you're choosing so I can begin the appropriate documentation. He stood up slowly, looking around the conference room one last time. I never meant for things to get this complicated. I know you didn't, but complexity doesn't excuse poor choices, David. And poor choices have consequences. After David left, I sat alone in the conference room. For a while, surrounded by the certificates and awards that documented our professional success. In a few hours, I'd gone from being the discarded wife to being the business owner making decisions about my cheating husband's future. The shift in power was so dramatic, it felt surreal. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. How did it go? I typed back, better than expected. David is learning that assumptions and reality are two different things. Good for you. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? My marriage was over. My husband had been cheating on me with an employee young enough, to be our daughter. My entire life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine yet, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. "Yes," I texted back. "I think I'm going to be fine." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of administrative tasks. I met with Janet to discuss staffing changes and patient scheduling. I called Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez to brief them on the situation and ask if they'd be willing to take on additional responsibilities during the transition period. Both doctors were shocked by the news but supportive of my decisions. "Mrs. Walsh," Dr. Peterson said, "I want you to know that I've always appreciated how you run this practice. You've created an environment where we can focus on patient care without worrying about the business side. Whatever changes you're making, I'm behind you." Dr. Martinez echoed the sentiment. "You've been nothing but professional and supportive since I joined the practice. If Dr. Walsh is leaving, I'm confident the practice will continue to thrive under your leadership." Their support meant more to me than I could express. David had assumed that respect for his clinical skills translated into personal loyalty, but these doctors understood the difference between appreciating a colleague and following him into professional uncertainty. At 4:30, David knocked on my office door. He looked tired and defeated, nothing like the confident man who'd announced his divorce plans that morning. "I've made my decision," he said, sitting down across from my desk. "Option 2, I'll resign voluntarily and cooperate with the transition." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. I think that's the wisest choice for everyone involved. "When do we start the transition process?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll have Carol draft the resignation agreement tonight, and we can review it first thing tomorrow." David stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Maggie, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just about Ashley, but about how I spoke to you this morning. You didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't. You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for." I looked at him across the desk, this man who'd shared my life for 35 years, but had never really seen me clearly. "Yes, David, I have." The next morning brought the kind of crisp October clarity that made me remember why I'd fallen in love with Iowa autumns. I arrived at Sunshine Dental 30 minutes earlier than usual, wanting to review the resignation agreement Carol had emailed me at 11 o'clock the night before. The parking lot was empty, except for Janet's Honda Civic, reliable as always. Inside, the practice hummed with its familiar morning energy. The coffee was brewing, the appointment system was updating, and the subtle sounds of preparation filled the air. This was my domain, I realized. Every system, every process, every detail that made this place function smoothly had been designed and implemented by me over the course of 35 years. Janet looked up from her computer as I passed the reception desk. "Morning, Mrs. Walsh. Dr. Walsh called earlier to say he'd be in around 9 to meet with you." "Thank you, Janet. Is everyone else aware of the staffing changes?" "Yes, ma'am. I spoke with Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez yesterday afternoon, and I've adjusted the hygienist schedule to cover Ashley's patients until we can hire a replacement." Janet had been with us for 12 years, and her seamless adaptation to yesterday's upheaval reminded me how competent my team really was. David liked to think of himself as the irreplaceable center of our operation, but the truth was that good systems could adapt to personnel changes, even dramatic ones. "How are the patients? Taking the news about Ashley's departure?" "So far, so good. I'm telling them she had a family emergency and had to relocate suddenly. Most people are just concerned about rescheduling their cleanings." I smiled at Janet's diplomatic handling of the situation. "And what about Dr. Walsh's patients?" "I haven't said anything yet. I thought you'd want to decide how to handle that communication." "You're right. Let's wait until after my meeting with Dr. Walsh this morning. We'll know more about the timeline then." I settled into my office with Carol's draft agreement and a cup of coffee. The document was thorough, covering everything from David's resignation, date to the transfer of patient records to the modification of his non-compete clause. Carol had included provisions I hadn't even thought of, like David's obligation to return all practice property and his agreement not to disparage the practice or solicit employees. At 9 o'clock sharp, David knocked on my door. He looked like he hadn't slept well, and his usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled. The confident man who'd announced his new life plans 24 hours ago had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely uncertain about the future. "Good morning," he said, sitting down without his usual casual confidence. "Good morning, David. I have the resignation agreement here for your review." I slid the document across the desk. "Take your time reading through it. If you have questions or concerns, we can discuss them." David put on his reading glasses and began working through the contract. I watched his face as he processed each section, seeing surprise, resignation, and occasionally what looked like relief. When he reached the financial terms, his eyebrows rose slightly. "This severance package is more generous than I expected," he said. "It reflects your years of service and your willingness to cooperate with the transition. It's also conditional on your compliance with all the terms of the agreement." He continued reading, occasionally asking questions about specific clauses. When he reached the section about patient communication, he looked up at me. "It says here that all announcements about my departure will be approved by you. What exactly are you planning to tell people?" "The truth, but tactfully, that you're leaving to pursue other opportunities, and that the practice will continue under the excellent care of Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez." "What about my personal relationships with patients? Some of these people have been coming to me for 20 years. They'll be given the option of transferring to one of our other doctors or receiving copies of their records to take elsewhere. But David, you need to understand that you can't actively solicit them to follow you to a new practice. That would violate the agreement." David nodded slowly. "What about referral relationships with other medical professionals?" "Those belong to the practice, not to you personally. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez will maintain the relationships we've built with physicians, orthodontists, and oral surgeons in the area." I could see David mentally calculating the impact of each restriction. The comfortable assumptions he'd lived with for 35 years were being systematically dismantled, replaced by the legal reality of his position as an employee rather than an owner. "There's one more thing I need to discuss with you," I said, pulling out another folder. "Your continuing education deficiency." David winced. "I was planning to catch up on that over the winter." "Unfortunately, we can't wait that long. The state dental board requires all practitioners to maintain current certification, and our malpractice insurance specifically excludes coverage for procedures performed by dentists who aren't in compliance." "What does that mean for the transition?" "It means you need to complete your required hours before you can continue seeing patients. I've arranged for you to attend an intensive continuing education program in Des Moines this weekend. It covers 12 hours of required credit, which will bring you into compliance." David looked surprised. "You arranged that for me?" "As the practice owner, I have a responsibility to ensure all employees meet professional standards. Your certification lapse reflects poorly on the entire practice." "Thank you. I appreciate you handling that." "It's not a favor, David. It's a business necessity." We spent the next hour going through the practical details of his transition. Patient schedules would be gradually transferred to the other doctors over the next 12 weeks. David would complete all his pending procedures but wouldn't take on any new complex cases. He'd participate in staff meetings and maintain professional relationships with colleagues until his departure date. "What about my office?" he asked. "You can keep using it during the transition period. After you leave, it will be converted into additional treatment space. And my personal items? You'll have time to pack them during your final week. Janet can provide boxes and help coordinate the logistics." When we finished reviewing the agreement, David sat back in his chair. "I need to ask you something, Maggie, and I want an honest answer." "Okay. Did you plan this when you had Carol set up the business structure all those years ago. Were you planning for the possibility that our marriage might end? I considered his question carefully. I planned for the possibility that business ownership and personal relationships might someday conflict. Carol advised me to protect my interests, and I followed her advice. But David, I never wanted our marriage to end. I never wanted to use these protections. But you're not sorry you have them. No, I'm not sorry. Yesterday morning, you assumed you could discard me and take everything I'd built. Without these protections, you probably could have. That would have been devastating for me and unfair to everyone who depends on this practice for their livelihood. David nodded slowly. I suppose I deserve that. This isn't about what anyone deserves, David. It's about the consequences of choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to assume you owned something you didn't. You chose to treat my contributions as insignificant. Those choices have led us to this moment. And if I hadn't made those choices, if I'd come to you and said I was unhappy and wanted to work on our marriage, I thought about his question, imagining a different version of yesterday morning. I don't know. Maybe we could have worked things out. Maybe we would have discovered that we'd grown into different people who wanted different things. But we'll never know, because you chose Ashley and deception instead of honest conversation. David picked up the pen and signed the resignation agreement without further comment. As he wrote his name, I felt a strange sense of finality. 35 years of marriage and business partnership were officially ending with the stroke of a pen. When do you want to announce this to the staff? He asked. This afternoon. I think it's important that everyone hears the news directly from us, together, rather than through gossip or speculation. What about Ashley? Do people know she was fired? They know she's no longer employed here. They don't need to know the specific reasons unless it becomes legally necessary. David stood up, the signed agreement in his hand. Should I give this to Janet to file? I'll handle it. Thank you for being reasonable about this process, David. I know it's not easy. It's easier than option 1 would have been. After David left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. Despite everything, despite the affair and the arrogance and the casual dismissal of my life's work, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt sad about the waste of it all, about the relationship that could have ended with dignity if David had chosen honesty over deception. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete confidence in my own judgment and abilities. For too long, I'd let David's need to be the center of attention overshadow my own accomplishments. I'd convinced myself that supporting his success was the same as achieving my own. Now, faced with the prospect of running Sunshine Dental without him, I realized I'd been running it all along. David had been the star performer, but I'd been the director, producer, and stage manager. The show would go on because I knew how to make it work. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Carol's number. How did the meeting go? She asked. He signed the agreement. He'll be staying through the end of December, then transitioning out. Good. How are you feeling about everything? Surprisingly calm. This morning, I was worried about how the practice would function without David. Now I'm realizing it might actually function better. Carol laughed. That's not surprising. You've been carrying the administrative load for 35 years. Without David's ego demanding constant management, you'll probably find you have a lot more energy for actual business development. Speaking of business development, I've been thinking about some changes I'd like to make. Expanding our hygienist services, maybe adding a pediatric specialist, updating our technology systems. Sounds like you're already planning for the future. I guess I am. For the first time in years, I feel like the future is actually mine to plan. The staff meeting that afternoon felt like a turning point, not just for David and me, but for everyone who worked at Sunshine Dental. I'd asked Janet to gather everyone in the main treatment area at 4 o'clock, after the last patient had been seen. Dr. Peterson, Dr. Martinez, our 3 remaining hygienists, our dental assistant Sarah, and our office manager Tim all stood in a loose circle around the reception area, their faces reflecting curiosity mixed with concern. Word had already spread about Ashley's sudden departure, and everyone could sense that bigger changes were coming. David stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture I recognized as his way of maintaining composure when he felt uncomfortable. The easy confidence that had defined his interactions with the staff for decades was noticeably absent, replaced by something that looked almost like deference. "Thank you all for staying after hours," I began, looking around at these people, who had become like family over the years. "David and I have some important news to share about changes that will be happening at the practice over the next few months." Tim, our office manager, shifted nervously. He'd been with us for 7 years and had developed a close working relationship with David on the financial side of patient care. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Walsh?" "Everything is fine from a business perspective," I assured him. "In fact, the practice is in excellent financial health, and we have strong growth projections for the coming year. But there will be some personnel changes." I glanced at David, giving him the opportunity to speak first. He cleared his throat and stepped forward slightly. "As many of you know, Mrs. Walsh and I are going through some personal changes," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "We've decided that it would be best for everyone if I transition out of the practice over the next few months." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Sarah, our longest-serving dental assistant, was the first to speak. "Dr. Walsh, does this mean you're retiring?" "Not exactly retiring. I'll be pursuing other opportunities, but I want to ensure that all of you and all of our patients have a smooth transition period." Dr. Peterson stepped forward. "What does this mean for patient care and the practice structure?" I took over the conversation at that point. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez will be taking on expanded roles and additional responsibilities. We'll also be hiring another associate dentist to ensure that we maintain our current level of patient care and availability. "What about our jobs?" asked Linda, one of our hygienists. "Are there going to be layoffs?" "Absolutely not," said firmly. "In fact, I'm planning to expand our services over the next year, which means we'll likely be adding staff, not reducing it." The relief on everyone's faces was visible. These people had built careers here, some for over a decade, and the stability of their employment was crucial to their family's well-being. Tim raised his hand tentatively. "Mrs. Walsh, will you be taking on a more active role in day-to-day operations?" "I'll be taking on the role of managing partner, overseeing both the clinical and business sides of the practice. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez will handle clinical leadership, and I'll continue managing the administrative operations, as I always have." Dr. Martinez, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Mrs. Walsh, I think I speak for both Dr. Peterson and myself when I say we're excited about the opportunity to expand our roles here. You've created an excellent working environment, and we're committed to maintaining the high standards you've established." Her words carried more weight than she probably realized. For years, I'd worried that the other doctors saw me as just David's wife, someone who handled paperwork while the real professionals did the important work. Hearing Dr. Martinez acknowledge my role in creating the practice culture was both validating and empowering. "I appreciate that confidence," I replied. "And I want all of you to know that your input will be valuable as we plan for the future." Over the next few weeks, I'll be meeting with each department to discuss ideas for improvement and expansion. Janet, who had been unusually quiet during the meeting, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Walsh, what should we tell patients who ask about the changes?" "We'll prepare a standard response that emphasizes continuity of care and our commitment to excellent service. David will be here through the end of December, so patients will have time to adjust to the transition." David nodded in agreement. "I want to emphasize that this change doesn't reflect any problems with the practice or the team. You're all excellent professionals, and I'm confident that Sunshine Dental will continue to thrive. After we dismissed the meeting, several staff members approached me individually to express their support and ask more detailed questions about the changes. Their responses gave me confidence that the transition would go more smoothly than I'd dared to hope. Dr. Peterson lingered after the others had left. "Mrs. Walsh, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Of course." We stepped into my office, and Dr. Peterson closed the door behind him. "I want you to know that I've been hoping for an opportunity like this for the past year." "What do you mean?" "I mean the chance to take on more responsibility and have more input into how the practice operates. Dr. Walsh is a skilled dentist, but his management style can be challenging. You've always been more collaborative and open to new ideas." His candor surprised me. "Can you give me an example?" "Last year, when I suggested we invest in digital imaging equipment, Dr. Walsh dismissed it without really considering the benefits. But when you researched it and presented the cost-benefit analysis, he suddenly thought it was a great idea and took credit for the decision." I remembered that situation clearly. David had initially rejected Dr. Peterson's suggestion as unnecessary, expensive technology. But after I'd spent weeks researching vendors, financing options, and projected efficiency gains, David had announced to a gathering of local dentists that he was leading the practice into the digital age. "I've noticed patterns like that over the years," Dr. Peterson continued. "You do the research, the planning, the implementation, and then Dr. Walsh presents the results as his vision. It's been frustrating to watch, especially knowing how much work you put into everything behind the scenes." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "What could I say? He was the owner, or so I thought. But now that I understand the real structure of the practice, I'm excited about the possibility of working more directly with you on practice development." Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from new technology, investments to expanded service offerings to improved staff development programs. Dr. Peterson had clearly been thinking about these issues for a long time, and his ideas were both practical and innovative. "There's one more thing I want to mention," he said as we prepared to wrap up. "Dr. Martinez and I have both been approached by other practices over the past year. Recruitment offers, partnership opportunities, that sort of thing." My stomach tightened. Losing both associate dentists would be catastrophic for the practice. "Are you considering leaving?" "Not anymore. The reason we were considering other opportunities was because we felt limited here. We wanted more input into practice decisions and more opportunities for professional growth. If you're willing to provide those opportunities, we'd much rather stay here and help build something special." Relief flooded through me. "I'm definitely willing. In fact, I'd like to discuss partnership opportunities with both of you over the next 6 months." Dr. Peterson's face lit up. "Partnership opportunities?" "The practice is financially strong and positioned for growth. I think it makes sense to bring in partners who share my vision for excellent patient care and sustainable business practices." "That would be incredible. Should I mention this to Dr. Martinez?" "Let me speak with her first. But yes, I'm interested in exploring partnership arrangements with both of you." After Dr. Peterson left, I sat in my office reviewing the day's events. In less than 48 hours, my entire life had been turned upside down, but somehow I felt more optimistic about the future than I had in years. The forced clarity of David's betrayal had shown me possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. "How did the staff meeting go?" I called her instead of texting back. "Better than I expected. The staff seems relieved that there won't be layoffs, and the other doctors are excited about expanded opportunities." "That's wonderful. How are you holding up emotionally?" I considered the question carefully. "I think I'm doing better than I should be. This morning I woke up dreading the day, but now I feel like I'm finally in control of my own destiny. That's exactly how you should feel. You've been managing other people's egos and expectations for 35 years. Now you get to focus on your own goals and vision. Carol, I want to ask you about something. Dr. Peterson mentioned that he and Dr. Martinez have been considering other opportunities. I'm thinking about offering them partnership stakes in the practice. What are the legal implications of that? It's definitely possible, but you'll want to structure it carefully. Partnership agreements need to address everything from profit, sharing to decision-making authority to exit strategies. But if you choose the right partners, it could be an excellent way to ensure the long-term stability and growth of the practice. Would you be willing to help me explore that? Absolutely. In fact, I think it's a brilliant idea. You'll be creating incentives for your best people to stay and invest in the practice's success. We talked for another few minutes about the logistics of partnership structures and timeline for implementation. By the time I hung up, I had a clear picture of how the next 6 months could unfold. A smooth transition as David departed, the addition of new staff and services, and the development of partnership agreements that would position Sunshine Dental for long-term success. The irony wasn't lost on me. David's affair and his arrogant assumptions about owning my business had created the catalyst for changes I'd been unconsciously wanting for years. His betrayal had forced me to claim my own power and authority in a way that politeness and compromise never could have. I stayed at the office until nearly 7 o'clock, reviewing financial projections and making notes about potential improvements. For the first time in years, I felt energized by the business side of dentistry, rather than overwhelmed by it. Without David's need for constant validation and credit, I could focus on actual problem-solving and strategic planning. As I prepared to leave, Janet knocked on my office door. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask about scheduling." "What about it?" "Well, Dr. Walsh usually handles his own scheduling, but with everything that's happening, should I start coordinating his appointments with the transition timeline?" It was a small question, but it represented a significant shift in office dynamics. For years, David had maintained control over his own schedule as a way of asserting his authority. Now, that authority was being transferred to me as the actual business owner. "Yes, please coordinate all scheduling with me. I want to ensure that Dr. Walsh's departure doesn't create gaps in patient care." "Should I also start booking new patient consultations with Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez instead of Dr. Walsh?" "That's a good idea. Let's gradually shift new patient intake to the doctors who will be here long-term." Janet nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Walsh, can I say something?" "Of course." "I've worked here for 12 years, and I've always admired how you handle everything behind the scenes. Dr. Walsh gets most of the attention, but everyone who works here knows that you're the one who makes everything run smoothly. I'm excited to see what you do with the practice now that you can make decisions without having to convince anyone else." Her words touched me more deeply than I expected. "Thank you, Janet. That means a lot coming from you. I just want you to know that you have our support, all of us. We're not just employees here, we're a team, and you've been our real leader for a long time." After Janet left, I sat alone in the quiet office, surrounded by the equipment and systems I'd spent 35 years organizing and maintaining. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as word of David's departure spread through our patient community and professional network. There would be questions to answer, concerns to address, and relationships to rebuild. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about the future. David's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. I no longer had to pretend that his achievements were more important than mine, or that his vision for the practice was the only one that mattered. Sunshine Dental was mine, and I was ready to show everyone exactly what that meant. The next morning brought the first real test of my newfound authority. I arrived at the office to find Dr. Martinez waiting in the parking lot, looking troubled. "Mrs. Walsh, could I speak with you before we open?" "Of course. Let's go to my office." Once we were seated, Dr. Martinez took a deep breath. "I need to tell you about a conversation I had last night. Dr. Walsh called me at home." My stomach tightened. What did he want to discuss? He asked if I'd be interested in joining him in a new practice. He said he was planning to open a dental office in Waterloo and wanted to know if I'd consider coming with him as a partner. I felt a flash of anger at David's audacity. Less than 24 hours after signing an agreement that prohibited him from soliciting employees, he was already trying to recruit my staff. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't interested, but Mrs. Walsh, I'm concerned about how he approached this. He made it sound like he was being forced out unfairly and that the practice would struggle without him." "Did he mention anything about your employment agreement here or about partnership opportunities we discussed yesterday?" "No, but he did say that working for you directly would be limiting and that I'd have more opportunities for advancement with him." I pulled out my phone and made a note to call Carol immediately after our conversation. David's solicitation of employees clearly violated his resignation agreement, and his misrepresentation of the circumstances around his departure could constitute defamation. "Dr. Martinez, I want you to know that Dr. Walsh's characterization of the situation is inaccurate. He wasn't forced out. He chose to resign after violating workplace conduct policies, and he agreed to the terms of his departure." I figured there was more to the story. Dr. Walsh has always been good at presenting situations in the way that makes him look best. "Can I ask you something directly? Are you happy working here, and are you interested in the partnership opportunities we discussed?" Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time since we'd started talking. "Mrs. Walsh, I love working here. The practice culture you've created is exactly what I was looking for when I graduated from dental school. And yes, I'm very interested in partnership opportunities." "Good. Then let's schedule a meeting next week to discuss the details. In the meantime, if Dr. Walsh contacts you again, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know immediately." "Absolutely. Mrs. Walsh, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why didn't you ever tell us that you were the owner of the practice? I mean, we always knew you handled the business side, but Dr. Walsh always presented himself as the owner." It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since this whole situation began. I suppose I thought it didn't matter as long as the practice was successful and everyone was happy. But I'm realizing that clarity about authority and ownership does matter, especially when difficult decisions need to be made. It definitely matters. And Mrs. Walsh, for what it's worth, I think the practice will be stronger with you in clear leadership. You understand both the business and clinical sides in a way that Dr. Walsh never did. After Dr. Martinez left, I called Carol and briefed her on David's attempt to recruit our staff. Her response was swift and decisive. "He's violated the agreement. You have grounds to terminate the severance package and enforce the full non-compete clause." What would that accomplish? It would send a clear message that violations have consequences. If you let this slide, he'll continue testing the boundaries of what he can get away with. But wouldn't that just create more conflict and potential disruption for the practice? Carol was quiet for a moment. "You know what, Maggie? You're probably right. You've got what you wanted. David out of the practice and your authority established. Fighting over contract violations might just prolong the drama. What should I do about his recruitment attempts? Document everything. If he continues soliciting employees, then you escalate. But if this was a one-time lapse in judgment, it might be better to focus on moving forward rather than looking backward. That feels right to me. I want to spend my energy building the practice up, not tearing David down. That's exactly the right approach. You've already won, Maggie. Now you just need to keep winning." The rest of the week unfolded with a series of small victories that reinforced my growing confidence. Dr. Peterson and I met with a technology vendor about upgrading our patient management system, something David had resisted for years. The new system would streamline scheduling, billing, and patient communication in ways that would benefit everyone. I also had productive conversations with each staff member about their roles and responsibilities going forward. Tim, our office manager, was excited about the opportunity to implement some efficiency improvements he'd been researching. Sarah, our dental assistant, expressed interest in cross-training to expand her skills. Even our part-time bookkeeper had suggestions for improving our financial reporting processes. It was becoming clear that David's departure was creating opportunities for everyone to grow and contribute more meaningfully to the practice's success. His need to be the center of attention had inadvertently stifled other people's initiative and creativity. On Friday afternoon, I received a call that crystallized just how much had changed in 1 week. "Mrs. Walsh, this is Dr. Jennifer Chen from Family Dentistry Associates in Iowa City. I hope you don't mind me calling directly." Dr. Chen was a respected pediatric dentist whose practice had been referring complex cases to us for several years. We'd met at professional conferences but had never worked together directly. "Not at all, Dr. Chen. How can I help you?" "I wanted to reach out because I've been hearing rumors about changes at your practice. Dr. Walsh called me yesterday to discuss a potential referral relationship with his new practice in Waterloo." I felt my jaw tighten. David was not only soliciting employees but also trying to redirect our referral relationships. "I see. What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd need to think about it. But frankly, Mrs. Walsh, I've always been more impressed with your practice management than with Dr. Walsh's clinical approach. When I refer families to you, I know they'll receive excellent care in a well-organized professional environment. That has more to do with your leadership than with any individual dentist." Her words were both gratifying and enlightening. "I appreciate that feedback, Dr. Chen. I'm actually calling to ask if you'd be interested in expanding your pediatric services. I'm considering retirement in the next few years, and I'd love to work with a practice like yours to ensure my patients have continuity of care." The opportunity she was describing was exactly the kind of strategic growth I'd been envisioning for the practice. I'd be very interested in exploring that possibility. "Wonderful. I was also wondering if you'd be willing to speak at our regional dental conference next spring about practice management. Your reputation in the professional community is excellent, and I think other practice owners could learn a lot from your approach." After we arranged to meet the following week, I sat in my office marveling at how quickly perceptions were shifting. For years, I'd been invisible at professional events, standing beside David while he networked and received recognition. Now, colleagues were reaching out to me directly, recognizing my expertise and seeking my input. David's betrayal had been painful, but it had also freed me from the limitations of being someone's supporting character. For the first time in my professional life, I was being seen and valued for my own contributions rather than my relationship to someone else's success. That evening, I called Carol to update her on the week's developments. "It sounds like everything is falling into place," she said. "How are you feeling about the personal side of all this?" "Honestly, I'm too busy to dwell on it. Between managing David's transition and planning for the practice's future, I barely have time to feel sorry for myself." "That's probably healthy. Are you sleeping okay?" "Better than I have in months, actually. I think I'd been carrying more stress about the marriage than I realized." "What about dating? Have you thought about what you want your personal life to look like going forward?" The question caught me off guard. "Carol, I've been divorced for exactly 1 week. I think it's a little early to be planning my dating life. I'm not talking about next week, but eventually. You're 57, financially independent, and about to be running a successful business. You've got a lot to offer someone. I suppose. But right now, I'm more interested in figuring out who I am as an individual than who I might be as part of a couple." That's exactly the right attitude. Build the life you want first, then find someone who fits into it rather than someone you need to reshape yourself to accommodate. After we hung up, I walked around my house, seeing it with new eyes. For 35 years, this had been our space, decorated according to compromises between David's preferences and mine. Now it was just mine, and I could make it reflect my own taste and priorities. I looked at the family photos lining the hallway, images of holidays and anniversaries and professional achievements spanning decades. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of deciding which memories to keep and which to put away. But tonight, I just appreciated the silence and the sense of possibility that filled every room. David had thought he was discarding me when he announced his affair and his plans to take my business. Instead, he had given me the gift of clarity about my own strength and value. I was grateful for 35 years of shared experiences, but I was even more grateful for the opportunity to discover what came next. The future was entirely mine to create, and I had never felt more ready for the challenge. 6 months after David's departure, I stood in the newly renovated conference room of Sunshine Dental, looking out at faces that represented everything I'd built and everything I was still building. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Martinez sat at the polished oak table, partnership agreements spread before them. Janet was there with her promotion letter to practice administrator. Tim had been elevated to financial manager, and Sarah was about to sign her contract as our new dental hygiene supervisor after completing her expanded certification. But the person I was most excited to introduce was Dr. Jennifer Chen, who had decided to merge her pediatric practice with ours rather than retire. Her patient base of over 800 families would nearly double our practice size and establish us as the premier family dental destination in 3 counties. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, feeling the weight and joy of this moment. 6 months ago, we faced some significant changes. Today, I'm proud to announce that not only have we weathered those changes, but we've emerged stronger than ever. The transformation had been remarkable. Our revenue was up 37% from the previous year. Patient satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. We'd reduced staff turnover to 0 and had a waiting list of qualified professionals wanting to join our team. Most importantly, we'd created a culture where everyone felt valued and heard. Dr. Peterson raised his glass of champagne. To Mrs. Walsh, who showed us what real leadership looks like. To Margaret, Dr. Martinez corrected with a smile, who finally let us call her by her first name. Everyone laughed. It had taken me months to get comfortable with the informality, but I'd realized that insisting on titles was just another way of maintaining unnecessary distance from people I trusted and respected. Actually, I said, I want to toast all of you. None of this would have been possible without your dedication, your ideas, and your willingness to embrace change. As we celebrated the official signing of our partnership agreements, my mind wandered to a conversation I'd had with David the week before. He'd called to ask for a reference for a position he was applying for at a corporate dental chain in Des Moines. His attempt to start an independent practice in Waterloo had failed after just 4 months. I never realized how much you handled behind the scenes, he'd admitted during that phone call. Running a practice is a lot more complicated than I thought. Yes, I'd replied simply. It is. Are you happy, Maggie? I know this wasn't the life you planned. I'd considered his question seriously before answering. I'm happier than I've been in years, David. This wasn't the life I planned, but it's turned out to be the life I needed. There had been pain in learning to rebuild my identity after 35 years of marriage. There had been lonely evenings and moments of doubt about my ability to handle everything on my own. But there had also been revelations about my own strength and capabilities that I might never have discovered if David hadn't forced me to claim my independence. The phone call had ended cordially, without anger or bitterness on either side. David was still with Ashley, though according to mutual friends, the relationship was strained by financial pressures and the reality of David's reduced professional status. I wished them well, genuinely, because harboring resentment would only have diminished my own happiness, Dr. Chen approached me as the celebration began to wind down. Margaret, I wanted to thank you again for making this partnership possible. When I first considered retirement, I was worried about what would happen to my patients. Now I know they'll receive even better care as part of your comprehensive practice. We're the ones who should be thanking you. Your expertise in pediatric dentistry will allow us to serve families in ways we never could before. I have to ask, she said, lowering her voice slightly. Was it difficult taking over full leadership after so many years of shared management? I thought about her question. It was terrifying at first. I'd spent so long supporting someone else's vision that I wasn't sure I could develop and execute my own. But I discovered that I'd been developing my own vision all along. I just hadn't had the opportunity to implement it. What would you tell other women who might be in similar situations? I'd tell them that competence doesn't require anyone else's permission or validation. If you've been doing the work, you already have the skills. You just need the courage to claim the authority that comes with those skills. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. I'm planning to write an article for the State Dental Association newsletter about practice transitions. Would you be willing to be interviewed about your experience? I'd be honored. As the evening concluded and everyone prepared to leave, Dr. Peterson lingered to speak with me privately. Margaret, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Dr. Martinez and I have been talking, and we think you should consider running for the State Dental Association board. The suggestion surprised me. I'm not a dentist. No, but you're one of the most respected practice administrators in the state. The association needs people who understand the business side of dentistry, not just the clinical side. Your experience with practice management, staff development, and patient relations would be invaluable. I'll think about it. There's a nominating deadline next month. The position would involve some travel and time commitment, but it would also give you a platform to influence policy and professional standards across the state. After everyone left, I walked through the quiet practice, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure for the weekend. The building felt different now than it had during the David years. Less tense, more collaborative, more purposeful. We'd kept all the best aspects of what we'd built together while eliminating the ego-driven dynamics that had limited our potential. In my office, I found a stack of patient thank you notes that Janet had left on my desk. I read through them, slowly, touched by the genuine appreciation families expressed for the care they received at Sunshine Dental. One letter from the mother of a 7-year-old particularly moved me. Dear Dr. Margaret and team, I wanted to thank you for making Emma's first dental visit such a positive experience. She was terrified of going to the dentist, but your gentle approach and the fun atmosphere you've created made her actually excited for her next appointment. As a single mother, I appreciate how you work with families on payment plans and scheduling. You treat us like people, not just customers. Reading letters like that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with the dental profession in the first place. It wasn't about the technical procedures or the business metrics, though those were important. It was about serving families during vulnerable moments and helping them maintain their health and confidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. How did the partnership signing go? I called her instead of texting back. Perfect. Everyone signed, Dr. Chen officially joined the practice, and we're now the largest family dental practice in the region. I'm so proud of you, Maggie. When I think about where you were 6 months ago compared to where you are now, it's almost hard to believe. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. The confident business owner making strategic decisions and leading a team of professionals. But then I remember that this is who I always was underneath all the compromise and accommodation. What's next for you personally? Any thoughts about dating or relationships? I laughed. You're persistent about this topic. I just want you to be happy. I am happy. For the first time in decades, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, with people who value my contributions. If romance Happens naturally. Great. But I'm not looking for it anymore. That's probably exactly when it will find you. After we hung up, I realized Carol was probably right. The desperate loneliness I'd felt immediately after David left had been replaced by contentment with my own company and excitement about my professional future. I'd learned to enjoy quiet dinners at home, weekend gardening projects, and evenings spent reading business journals or researching new dental technologies. I'd also reconnected with friendships that had been neglected during my marriage. Other women my age who were navigating divorces, career changes, and the complexities of midlife independence. We met for book clubs and hiking groups, and wine, tastings, supporting each other through transitions and celebrating each other's victories. The following Monday brought news that crystallized just how much my professional reputation had evolved. Dr. Harrison, the president of the State Dental Association, called to personally ask if I'd consider accepting a nomination to the board of directors. Margaret, your reputation for practice excellence and ethical leadership has caught the attention of our nominating committee. We need board members who understand both the clinical and business aspects of modern dentistry. Dr. Harrison, I'm honored by the consideration, but I want to be clear that I'm not a licensed dentist. We understand that, and it's actually one of your qualifications. Too many decisions affecting dental practices are made by clinicians who don't fully understand practice management challenges. We need your perspective. What would the responsibilities involve? Board meetings quarterly, policy review and development, representing the association at professional conferences. It's a 3-year commitment, but it would position you as a voice for practice administrators across the state. I thought about Dr. Peterson's similar suggestion and realized this was an opportunity to influence the profession I'd devoted my career to. I'd like to learn more about the specific expectations and time commitments. Excellent. I'll have our nominating coordinator send you a complete information packet. That afternoon, I received a call that put the State Dental Association opportunity in perspective. Dr. Williams from the Midwest Dental Practice Management Institute was inviting me to speak at their annual conference about practice transitions and leadership change. Mrs. Walsh, we've been following your practice's growth and transformation over the past year. The metrics are impressive, but what's really caught our attention is the cultural transformation you've achieved. We'd like you to present a case study about managing major organizational change while maintaining patient care quality. I'd be honored to speak at your conference. The audience would be practice owners and administrators from across the Midwest. Your experience would be valuable to anyone dealing with partnership changes, leadership transitions, or practice restructuring. After confirming the speaking engagement, I sat in my office reflecting on the trajectory of the past year. 12 months ago, I'd been the invisible wife of a respected dentist, managing his practice while he received credit for its success. Now I was being invited to share my expertise with other professionals, recognized as a leader in my own right. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's betrayal had been the catalyst for this transformation. His affair and his arrogant assumptions about owning my business had forced me to claim authority I'd always possessed but never exercised. In trying to discard me, he'd actually liberated me to become more successful than I'd ever imagined possible. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't visited their graves since David and I had separated, partly because the cemetery held memories of attending services there as a couple, but tonight felt like the right time to reconnect with the people who'd shaped my values and work ethic. Standing beside their headstones, I found myself talking to them as if they were there to listen. Mom, Dad, I know you'd be proud of what I've built. You taught me that hard work and integrity matter more than recognition or praise. You showed me that treating people with respect and dignity creates loyalty that can't be purchased. Those lessons are the foundation of everything I've accomplished. A gentle breeze rustled the oak trees overhead, and I felt a sense of peace that had been missing from my life for months. My parents had raised me to be strong and independent. but decades of marriage had gradually eroded my confidence in those qualities. Reclaiming them had been like rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. As I drove home, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Walsh? This is Dr. Amanda Foster from the University of Iowa College of Dentistry. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. How can I help you?" "I'm calling because we're developing a new curriculum for practice management, and your name has come up repeatedly as someone whose expertise would benefit our students. Would you be interested in guest lecturing about real-world practice administration?" "I'd be very interested in that opportunity." "Wonderful. We're particularly interested in your experience with staff development, patient relations, and practice growth strategies. Our students graduate with excellent clinical skills, but often struggle with the business aspects of dentistry." By the time I arrived home, I had 3 new professional opportunities to consider: the State Dental Association board position, the speaking engagement at the Practice Management Conference, and the guest lecturing opportunity at the dental school. Each represented recognition of expertise I'd developed over 35 years, but had never been acknowledged for during my marriage. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, looking out at the garden I'd designed and maintained throughout my marriage. Tomorrow I would begin preparing for the Practice Management Conference presentation. Next week I would meet with the dental school about curriculum development. In a month, I might be serving on the state's most influential dental policy board. The future stretched before me like an open road, full of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine when I was David's supporting character. I thought about the scared, hurt woman who'd sat in this same spot 6 months ago, wondering how she'd survive the collapse of everything she thought she knew about her life. That woman could never have imagined the confident professional who now occupied her space. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless, but it had been necessary. David's betrayal had forced me to confront the difference between who I'd been pretending to be and who I actually was. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Peterson. "Margaret, saw the article in today's Dental Tribune about innovative practice models. They quoted you as an expert on staff development and practice culture. Congratulations on the national recognition." I looked up the article online and found myself described as a pioneering practice administrator whose innovative approach to staff development and patient care has become a model for practices across the Midwest. The reporter had interviewed me 3 weeks earlier about our partnership structure and collaborative management style. Reading the article, I realized I was no longer just running a successful dental practice. I was influencing how other practices operated, contributing to the professional conversation about best practices and ethical standards. My voice mattered in ways it never had during the David years. As I prepared for bed, I thought about the question Dr. Chen had asked about advice for other women in similar situations. The answer was becoming clearer with each passing day. Competence is its own authority. If you've been doing the work, you already have the qualifications. The only thing standing between you and recognition is your willingness to claim the credit you've earned. David had assumed that his charm and clinical skills made him irreplaceable, that patients and staff were loyal to him personally rather than to the practice culture we'd built together. He'd been wrong on both counts. Patients appreciated excellent care delivered with warmth and professionalism, regardless of which doctor provided it. Staff valued respect, fair compensation, and opportunities for growth more than they valued working with a charismatic leader. The practice was thriving not because I'd replaced David with someone equally talented, but because I'd eliminated the ego-driven dynamics that had prevented our team from reaching its full potential. Without David's need to be the center of attention, everyone else had space to contribute meaningfully to our collective success. The lesson wasn't just applicable to dental practices. It was relevant to any situation where one person's ego and insecurity stifled other people's potential. David's departure had revealed that the most important leadership quality wasn't charisma or clinical expertise. It was the ability to create an environment where everyone could do their best work. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain of David's betrayal had been real and significant, but it had also been transformative. I'd discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, claimed authority I'd always deserved, and built a life that reflected my values rather than my compromises. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. There would be difficult decisions to make, problems to solve, and relationships to navigate. But I would face those challenges as the person I'd always been underneath the accommodation and self-doubt. A competent, confident woman who'd built something remarkable and wasn't afraid to own her success. David had thought he was discarding me when he chose Ashley and assumed he could take my business. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted me to be. 6 months after the worst day of my marriage, I was living the best period of my professional life, and I was just getting started. 1 year after David's resignation, I received an invitation that perfectly encapsulated how dramatically my life had changed. The Iowa Business Leadership Association was hosting their annual Women in Business Awards ceremony, and I had been nominated for Executive of the Year. The letter sat on my desk for several minutes as I processed what it meant to be recognized alongside CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, tech entrepreneurs, and healthcare system administrators. The nomination had come from an unexpected source: Dr. Rebecca Morrison, the Dean of the University of Iowa College of Dentistry. She'd written a detailed letter highlighting my transformation of Sunshine Dental from a traditional single-doctor practice into an innovative multi-specialty healthcare destination that other practices across the region were now trying to emulate. Mrs. Walsh has demonstrated that visionary leadership isn't about commanding attention, but about creating systems that allow everyone to excel, her nomination letter stated. Under her guidance, Sunshine Dental has become a model for ethical practice management, employee development, and patient-centered care. Her influence extends far beyond her own practice through her mentoring of other administrators and her contributions to professional education. I picked up my phone and called Carol to share the news. "Maggie, that's incredible. Are you going to attend the ceremony?" "I think I have to. The ceremony is next month in Des Moines. It's a formal dinner with about 500 business leaders from across the state. You absolutely have to go. And you need to buy something spectacular to wear. This is your moment to shine." Carol was right. For too many years, I'd attended professional events as David's plus one, wearing conservative outfits chosen to complement his image rather than express my own personality. This time, I would be there as myself, representing my own achievements. The following weeks brought a series of developments that reinforced just how much momentum my career had gained. The State Dental Association formally elected me to their board of directors, making me the first non-dentist to serve in that capacity. My presentation at the Midwest Practice Management Conference had been so well received that 3 other regional associations had requested similar presentations. Most significantly, the University of Iowa had offered me a part-time faculty position developing their new Practice Administration Certificate program. Margaret, Dr. Foster explained during our meeting about the faculty position, "We're not just talking about guest lectures anymore. We want you to design and teach a comprehensive curriculum that prepares dental school graduates for the realities of practice ownership and management." What would that involve specifically? 2 courses per semester, practice operations and leadership, and patient relations and business ethics. You'd have full autonomy over curriculum development and teaching methods. The opportunity was both exciting and daunting. Teaching had always appealed to me, but I'd never imagined having the credentials or platform to pursue it seriously. "I should mention," Dr. Foster continued, "that this position comes with a significant administrative component. We'd like you to serve as Director of Practice Management Education, overseeing not just your own courses, but coordinating with other faculty members who teach business-related topics. What's the time commitment? Approximately 15 hours per week during the semester, plus preparation time. The position includes faculty benefits and would allow you to maintain your practice responsibilities. I accepted the position immediately. The chance to influence how future dentists approached practice management felt like a natural extension of everything I'd built at Sunshine Dental. That evening, I celebrated the faculty appointment with my team at our monthly practice meeting. These gatherings had evolved into something much more collaborative than the perfunctory staff meetings of the David era. Everyone contributed ideas, shared feedback about operational improvements, and participated in strategic planning. Dr. Margaret, Sarah said, using the honorary title the staff had started applying since my university appointment. This is amazing news. You'll be teaching future dentists to treat their staff the way you treat us. What do you mean? Like professionals with valuable input rather than just employees who follow orders, Tim explained. When I worked at corporate dental chains, before coming here, administrators were treated like replaceable parts. Here, you ask for our ideas and actually implement them. Janet nodded in agreement. My husband works for a practice where the dentist makes every decision unilaterally, even about things he doesn't understand. The staff turnover there is constant because no one feels valued. Dr. Peterson leaned forward. Margaret, this is exactly why your teaching position is so important. Most dental schools don't adequately prepare students for the people management aspects of practice ownership. They graduate thinking clinical skills are sufficient, but then they struggle with staff relations, patient communication, and business operations. What would you want future dentists to understand about working with practice administrators? I asked the group. That we're partners, not subordinates, Dr. Martinez replied immediately. A good administrator like you makes it possible for us to focus on patient care without worrying about whether the bills are paid or the schedule is optimized. Also, added Linda, our senior hygienist, that respecting your staff's expertise in their areas creates better outcomes for everyone. You trust me to manage patient education and preventive care protocols because that's my specialty, just like I trust the doctors for clinical diagnosis. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from communication styles to decision-making processes to professional development opportunities. By the end, I had a clear vision for what I wanted to teach future dental professionals: that successful practices are collaborative enterprises where everyone's expertise contributes to patient care and business success. 2 weeks before the award ceremony, I received news that put all my recent achievements in perspective. Ashley, David's former girlfriend and the catalyst for our divorce, had called Janet asking if we were hiring hygienists. Mrs. Walsh, Janet said carefully, I told her we weren't currently accepting applications, but I thought you should know she reached out. What did she say specifically? She mentioned that she's been having trouble finding stable employment and wondered if you might consider giving her another chance. The irony was remarkable. Ashley had chosen David over job security, believing his promises about owning a successful practice and building a future together. Now, a year later, she was seeking employment at the practice she'd helped destabilize. What would you like me to tell her if she calls back? I thought about the question seriously. My initial impulse was to simply say no, given the workplace disruption she'd caused. But I also recognized that Ashley had been young and naive when she'd gotten involved with David. Her poor judgment shouldn't necessarily define her entire career. If she calls back, transfer her to me. I'll speak with her directly. Ashley called the next morning, her voice tentative and apologetic. Mrs. Walsh, I know I have no right to ask, but I'm hoping you might consider interviewing me for any openings you might have. Ashley, I appreciate you calling directly. Can you tell me what's happened since you left here? I worked at Dr. Walsh's practice in Waterloo for 4 months before it closed. Since then, I've had 3 different positions, but none of them worked out long term. I'm realizing that what we had at Sunshine Dental was special, and I made a terrible mistake in jeopardizing it. What kind of mistakes are you referring to? Getting involved with Dr. Walsh was unprofessional and created problems for everyone. I was young and flattered by the attention, but I should have understood the consequences better. Her honesty was refreshing, and I found myself considering possibilities I hadn't expected to contemplate. Ashley, we don't have any hygienist openings currently, but I'm willing to meet with you to discuss your career goals and perhaps provide a reference for other positions. I would appreciate that so much. Mrs. Walsh, I want you to know that watching how you handled everything taught me a lot about professionalism and integrity. You had every right to be vindictive, but you weren't. We arranged to meet the following week. I wasn't planning to hire Ashley back, but I was curious about her perspective on the events that had changed all our lives. The meeting took place in my office on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Ashley looked older than her 27 years, and her usual bright confidence had been replaced by something more subdued and thoughtful. Mrs. Walsh, I want to start by apologizing for my role in disrupting your workplace and your marriage. I was selfish and short-sighted, and I've spent the past year understanding how my choices affected other people. I appreciate that, Ashley. What have you learned from the experience? I learned that workplace relationships are complicated in ways I didn't appreciate. I thought being with Dr. Walsh was just about us, but it affected you, the other staff members, patient care, and the practice's reputation. What are your career goals now? I want to work in a practice where I can develop my skills and contribute to a positive team environment. I realize now that what made Sunshine Dental special wasn't Dr. Walsh's clinical abilities, but the culture you created where everyone felt valued and supported. Her insight surprised me. Can you elaborate on that? At the other practices, where I've worked this year, the atmosphere was completely different. Dentists who treated staff like disposable resources, administrators who didn't understand patient care, owners who cared more about profit margins than professional development. It made me realize that you weren't just managing a business here, you were building something meaningful. We talked for another 30 minutes about her experiences at different practices and her observations about what made some workplaces successful, while others struggled with turnover and low morale. Ashley's perspectives were thoughtful and demonstrated genuine growth from her mistakes. Ashley, I want to be honest with you. I'm not in a position to offer you employment here, both because we don't have openings and because your history with this practice would create awkwardness for other staff members. I understand completely. However, I'm willing to provide a reference focusing on your clinical skills and work ethic prior to the situation with Dr. Walsh. I'll also keep your resume on file in case circumstances change in the future. Thank you. That's more than I had any right to expect. After Ashley left, I reflected on the conversation and what it revealed about the ripple effects of workplace dynamics. Her involvement with David hadn't just disrupted our marriage, it had derailed her career trajectory and taught her difficult lessons about professional ethics. The consequences of their choices had extended far beyond the immediate participants. The week of the award ceremony arrived with unseasonably warm weather for late October. I had found the perfect dress, a deep navy silk with elegant lines that made me feel confident and professional. Carol had driven down from Minneapolis to attend the ceremony with me, and we spent the afternoon before the event talking about everything that had led to this moment. Maggie, when I think about where you were a year ago compared to where you are today, it's almost like you're a completely different person. I don't think I'm different. I think I'm finally being who I always was underneath all the accommodation and compromise. That's probably more accurate. You always had these capabilities, but you were never in a position to fully demonstrate them. David's affair was devastating at the time, but I'm starting to think it was the best thing that could have happened to my career. I never would have claimed this level of authority and recognition if I'd stayed in the supporting role. The award ceremony was held at the Des Moines Convention Center, with round tables for 8 surrounding a stage where Iowa's most successful business leaders would be recognized. I found myself seated with other nominees in my category: the CEO of a regional hospital system, the founder of a successful software company, the president of a manufacturing corporation, and the executive director of a statewide nonprofit organization. Margaret Walsh, Sunshine Dental, I introduced myself to the table. Dental practice ownership, replied Susan Chen, the hospital CEO. That's fascinating. Most people don't realize how complex healthcare practice management can be. What size practice do you run? Asked David Park, the software company founder. We're at 42 employees now, serving about 12,000 active patients across multiple specialties. That's substantial, noted Lisa Rodriguez, the nonprofit director. Healthcare operations require such careful attention to regulatory compliance and patient safety protocols. The conversation continued throughout the dinner, with other nominees asking thoughtful questions about healthcare business models, staff development strategies, and patient relations management. I realized I was holding my own in discussions with executives who ran much larger organizations, contributing insights they found valuable and learning from their experiences in other industries. When the Executive of the Year category was announced, my heart pounded as the presenter read through each nominee's accomplishments. The winner was Susan Chen for her leadership in expanding rural healthcare access, but the presenter noted that all 5 nominees represented excellence in their respective fields. While we can only recognize one winner tonight, she said, each of these leaders has demonstrated the vision, integrity, and impact that defines executive excellence in Iowa. After the ceremony, several attendees approached me to discuss my work and express interest in learning more about innovative practice management approaches. A reporter from Iowa Business Magazine requested an interview about women's leadership in healthcare. The executive director of the Iowa Small Business Association invited me to speak at their annual conference. Most meaningfully, Susan Chen asked if I'd be interested in serving on the advisory board for a new rural healthcare initiative she was developing. Margaret, your experience building collaborative practice cultures would be invaluable as we work with small-town healthcare providers. Many rural practices struggle with staff retention and patient engagement, issues you've clearly mastered. By the time Carol and I returned to our hotel room, I had business cards from 15 different professionals and invitations to participate in 3 separate leadership initiatives. Maggie, do you realize what just happened tonight? Carol asked as we kicked off our heels and collapsed into chairs. I think I just became part of the state's business leadership community. More than that, you became a recognized expert, whose opinion other leaders value. A year ago, you were the invisible wife of a dentist. Tonight, you were networking with CEOs and being recruited for advisory positions. She was right. The transformation had been so gradual that I hadn't fully appreciated its magnitude until this moment. David's betrayal had forced me to rebuild my identity from scratch, and I'd emerged stronger and more successful than I'd ever imagined possible. The following Monday brought confirmation that my new status as a respected business leader was translating into concrete opportunities. Dr. Morrison from the dental school called to inform me that my courses had been approved for the spring semester, and that early enrollment numbers were exceeding expectations. Margaret, we've had inquiries from practicing dentists who want to audit your courses. Apparently, word is spreading in the professional community about your innovative approaches to practice management. What kind of practicing dentists? Mostly younger practitioners who are struggling with staff relations and business operations. They realize their dental school education didn't adequately prepare them for the non-clinical aspects of practice ownership. Would it be possible to offer continuing education versions of the courses for practicing professionals? That's exactly what I was hoping you'd suggest. We're thinking about developing a professional development certificate program that would allow practicing dentists and their administrators to complete intensive weekend courses. The conversation continued with discussions about curriculum development, faculty collaboration, and program marketing. By the end, we'd outlined a comprehensive professional education initiative that would position the University of Iowa as a leader in dental practice management training. That afternoon, I received a call that brought the year's journey full circle. David's voice on the phone was hesitant, almost humble. "Maggie, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to congratulate you on the Business Award nomination. I saw the article in the Dental Tribune." "Thank you, David. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well. I started a new position last month as an associate dentist with a group practice in Ankeny. It's different from what I'm used to, but I'm learning to appreciate not having to worry about the business side of things. I'm glad you found something that works for you. Maggie, I called because I wanted to tell you something. Seeing what you've accomplished this year has made me realize how much I took for granted during our marriage. I never understood how much you contributed to our success, and I'm sorry for that." "I appreciate you saying that, David. Ashley and I aren't together anymore. It turned out that what we thought was love was mostly just the excitement of doing something forbidden. When the reality of building a life together set in, we realized we didn't actually have much in common." I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication hearing this news. "I'm sorry it didn't work out for you." "Don't be sorry. It was probably inevitable. We were both running from our real problems instead of facing them." He paused. "Maggie, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me for how everything happened?" I considered his question carefully. "I forgave you months ago, David. Not because what you did was acceptable, but because holding on to anger was preventing me from moving forward. Do you think we could ever be friends again? Maybe someday. But right now, I'm focused on building my new life, and that needs to happen without connections to the past. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You've always been stronger and more capable than either of us realized." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation and what it represented. David's apology couldn't undo the pain his choices had caused, but it did provide a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. More importantly, his acknowledgement of my capabilities validated what I'd discovered about myself over the past year. I hadn't become stronger or more capable. I'd simply finally had the opportunity to demonstrate strengths that had always existed, but had been overshadowed by his need to be the center of attention. That evening, I called my staff to share some exciting news. The University of Iowa had formally approved my proposal for the Professional Development Certificate program, and they wanted Sunshine Dental to serve as the primary clinical site for hands-on training components. "What does that mean for us?" asked Dr. Peterson. "It means we'll be hosting weekend workshops where practicing dentists and their administrators can observe our operations and learn about collaborative practice management. We'll essentially become a teaching practice." "That sounds amazing," Dr. Martinez responded. "Will we be involved in the teaching?" "Absolutely. The program is designed around our actual workflows and management systems. You'll all be contributing your expertise to help other practices improve their operations." The conversation continued with enthusiastic discussions about curriculum development, teaching responsibilities, and the opportunity to influence professional standards across the region. Everyone was excited about the chance to share what we'd built and to continue learning from other professionals. 6 months later, as I prepared for my second year of teaching at the University of Iowa, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought me to this point. The Professional Development Certificate program had graduated its first cohort of participants, with unanimous feedback that the training had significantly improved their practice operations and staff satisfaction. Sunshine Dental had been featured in 3 professional publications as a model for innovative practice management. I'd been invited to speak at conferences in 7 states and had consulted with practices across the Midwest on organizational development and leadership strategies. Most importantly, I'd built a life that felt authentically mine. Every decision I made, every opportunity I pursued, every relationship I maintained reflected my own values and priorities rather than compromises designed to support someone else's vision. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee and the latest issue of Practice Management Today, which featured an article I'd written about staff development strategies. The byline read, Dr. Margaret Walsh, Director of Practice Management Education, University of Iowa College of Dentistry, a title that still gave me a sense of pride and accomplishment. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. Saw your article in Practice Management Today. Mom and Dad would be so proud of everything you've accomplished. She was right. My parents had raised me to believe that hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect were the foundations of success. They'd taught me that real leadership meant creating opportunities for others to excel, not demanding credit for their achievements. David's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been liberating. It had forced me to stop accommodating other people's egos and start claiming the recognition I'd earned. The confident professional who now taught at the university and consulted with practices across the region had always existed. She'd just needed the courage to step into the spotlight. As I finished reading the magazine and prepared to start my day, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The future stretched ahead with possibilities I was only beginning to explore. Research projects, writing opportunities, consulting engagements, and the chance to influence how healthcare practices operated across the country. David had thought he was discarding me when he chose Ashley and assumed he could take my business. Instead, he'd given me the greatest gift possible: the freedom to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted me to be. A year and a half after the worst day of my marriage, I was living the most fulfilling period of my entire life, and this was just the beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.